He was a man who became the face of terror, the mastermind of the most devastating attack on American soil since Pearl Harbor. But who was Osama bin Laden before the world knew his name? How did the privileged son of a billionaire transform into the world's most wanted man? His father, Mohammed Awad bin Laden, came to the kingdom from Hadramaut, South Yemen, sometime around 1930. The father started his life as a very poor laborer, porter in Jeddah port, to end up as the owner of the biggest construction company in the kingdom. During the reign of King Saud, bin Laden the father became very close to the royal family when he took the risk of building King Saud's palaces much cheaper than the cheapest bid. He impressed King Saud with his performance, but also built good relations with other members of the royal family, especially Faisal. During the Saud-Faisal conflict in the early 60s, bin Laden, the father, had a big role in convincing King Saud to step down in favor of Faisal. After Saud's departure, the treasury was empty, and bin Laden was so supportive of King Faisal that he literally paid the civil servants' wages of the whole kingdom for 6 months. King Faisal then issued a decree that all construction projects should go to bin Laden. Indeed, he was appointed for a period as the Minister of Public Works. In 1967, Mohammed Awad bin Laden died in an airplane accident. By this time, his company had become one of the largest construction firms in the Middle East, and the bin Laden family had developed a close relationship with the Saudi royal family. By the time Osama was born on March 10, 1957, in Riyadh, he was one of over 50 children in a sprawling, polygamous family. His mother, Alia Ghanem, was a Syrian woman and one of the wives of Mohammed bin Laden. Osama was her first son. Osama was exposed very early in his age to his father's business and religious environment, but he lost his father when he was 10. He grew up as a religiously committed boy, and his early marriage at the age of 17 to a Syrian girl, Najwa bin Laden, who was a relative, was another factor in protecting him from corruption. His father used to host hundreds of pilgrims during the Hajj season from all over the world. Some of those were senior Islamic scholars or leaders of Muslim movements. This habit went on even after his father's death through his elder brothers. Osama used to make good contacts and relations through those gatherings. At secondary school and university, he adopted the main trend of many educated Muslims at that time, the Muslim Brotherhood. There was a collection of Muslim scholars in Jeddah and Mecca at that period. There was nothing extraordinary in his personality, and that trend was rather very non-confrontational. Interestingly, the 1980 raid in the Grand Mosque in Mecca was not appealing to him, neither the theology nor that group. He had 2 distinguished teachers in Islamic studies, which was a compulsory subject in the university. First was Abdullah Azzam, who later became one of the big names in Afghanistan, and the second was Muhammad Qutb, a famous Islamic writer and philosopher. Osama bin Laden had a degree in public administration in 1981 from King Abdulaziz University in Jeddah, where it is likely that he also received instruction in religious studies from Muhammad Qutb, brother of the Islamic revivalist Sayyid Qutb, and Abdullah Azzam, a militant leader. His time at the university was key to his future role as the leader of Al-Qaeda, not only in influencing his radical views, but also in providing him with the skill to market Al-Qaeda. Countries of the Arabian Peninsula, Syria, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Sudan are the only countries he has been to. Osama bin Laden's journey to Switzerland in the late 1970s offers a glimpse into a young man far removed from the radical figure he would later become. According to various biographies and accounts from Swiss records, this trip was part of an educational excursion facilitated by his wealthy family. The bin Laden construction empire had global connections, and Switzerland represented a hub of banking and diplomacy that intrigued the family. While in Switzerland, bin Laden reportedly spent time in Geneva and Zurich, absorbing Western culture yet feeling increasingly alienated by it. Some scholars believe his time in Switzerland solidified his disdain for Western materialism, a theme that would later feature prominently in his rhetoric. However, at this stage, there was no indication of the radicalism to come. London, often seen as a melting pot of cultures and ideas, became a key location in Osama bin Laden's early ideological development. In the 1980s, bin Laden visited London as part of his family's business ventures. The bin Laden Group had significant investments in Europe, and young Osama was exposed to the bustling metropolis at a pivotal time in his life. According to accounts from former associates and MI5 intelligence, his trips to London were not just about business. He reportedly attended gatherings of Islamist thinkers and clerics, where debates about Western imperialism and the plight of Muslims worldwide were heated. These meetings likely influenced bin Laden's worldview, reinforcing his belief that the West was the root of many problems facing the Islamic world. The year 1979 was a seismic moment in global geopolitics and in the personal transformation of Osama bin Laden. The Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan on December 24, 1979, as documented by the U.S. Congressional Research Service, marked the beginning of a bloody conflict that drew global attention. For many Muslims across the Middle East, this invasion of a Muslim-majority nation by an atheist superpower was seen as a call to arms, a violation of the Islamic Ummah, the global Muslim community. By 1979, Osama bin Laden had resolved to leave behind the comforts of his privileged upbringing. At the age of 22, he traveled from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, to Pakistan and then into Afghanistan. In the early years, bin Laden was not a fighter in the traditional sense. Rather, he was a financier and organizer, using his construction expertise to build tunnels, roads, and bunkers for the Mujahideen. His wealth and connections also allowed him to recruit volunteers from across the Arab world, creating what would later be known as the Arab Afghans. In 1982, he decided to go inside Afghanistan. He brought with him plenty of construction machinery and put them at the disposal of the Mujahideen. In 1984, he established the guest house in Peshawar, Baitul Ansar, and started strengthening his presence. In 1986, he built his own camps inside Afghanistan. In 1988, he formalized his network and termed it Al-Qaeda, meaning the base. Osama bin Laden's connection to the Philippines in the early 1990s involved ties to local Islamist groups, most notably Abu Sayyaf. Philippine intelligence reports indicate that bin Laden's network funneled money to extremist groups through charity organizations. These interactions laid the groundwork for terrorist plots, including the infamous Bajinka plot, an al-Qaeda plan to bomb multiple airliners over the Pacific. These moments, combined with his radicalization, wealth, and leadership, created the figure who would leave an indelible mark on history. In 1991, as bin Laden's rhetoric became increasingly inflammatory, the Saudi government stripped him of his citizenship and forced him into exile. According to declassified U.S. State Department cables, this decision was partly influenced by bin Laden's growing influence among Islamic militants and his attempts to mobilize opposition to the monarchy. After his expulsion, bin Laden moved to Sudan, which was then under the Islamist government of Hassan al-Turabi. Sudan offered a haven for Islamic militants, and bin Laden was able to continue his activities there largely unchecked. In Sudan, bin Laden used his wealth and network to establish training camps, businesses, and logistical hubs for al-Qaeda. Declassified intelligence from the U.S. National Counterterrorism Center highlights how bin Laden financed infrastructure projects in Sudan, such as road construction, while simultaneously organizing terrorist operations. Sudan became a critical base for al-Qaeda during this period, enabling the group to expand its global reach. Bin Laden viewed the presence of U.S. troops near the Islamic holy cities of Mecca and Medina as an affront to Islam. He considered it a desecration of sacred land and a betrayal by the Saudi monarchy, whom he accused of collaborating with infidels. In a 1996 fatwa, bin Laden described the U.S. military presence as the greatest of crimes and called for a jihad against the American occupation. Bin Laden openly criticized the Saudi government for allowing foreign troops on its soil. This vocal dissent was viewed as a direct challenge to the monarchy's legitimacy, which relies heavily on its role as the custodian of Islam's holiest sites. On August 7, 1998, a truck bomb detonated outside the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi, Kenya. The explosion killed 213 people and injured over 4,000, most of whom were Kenyan civilians. Tanzania attack. Almost simultaneously, a second truck bomb exploded outside the U.S. Embassy in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. This attack killed 11 people and injured 85. The bombings were highly coordinated, showcasing al-Qaeda's operational capabilities and its ability to carry out large-scale attacks in multiple locations. Investigations revealed that the attacks were meticulously planned over several months, with operatives infiltrating the target locations and assembling the bombs on site. In the months following the attacks, al-Qaeda claimed responsibility. Statements attributed to bin Laden described the bombings as retaliation for U.S. policies in the Middle East, including support for Israel and the stationing of troops in Saudi Arabia. The attacks were intended to send a message to the United States, warning of further violence if American forces did not withdraw from Muslim lands. Bin Laden and al-Qaeda viewed U.S. embassies as symbols of Western oppression and intervention in the Islamic world. In response to the bombings, the United States launched cruise missile strikes against al-Qaeda training camps in Afghanistan and a pharmaceutical plant in Sudan suspected of producing chemical weapons. These strikes, while causing some damage, failed to significantly disrupt al-Qaeda's operations. The bombings marked a turning point in global awareness of al-Qaeda. As noted in reports from the U.S. Department of Justice, the attacks underscored the group's ability to strike far from its base of operations, and bin Laden became a central figure in international counterterrorism efforts. The FBI launched one of its largest international investigations, uncovering a complex network of operatives linked to al-Qaeda. Court documents from the trial of embassy bombing suspects revealed detailed evidence of bin Laden's involvement, including financial transactions, communications, and the role of his senior lieutenants in coordinating the attacks. In 1998, bin Laden was indicted in the United States on charges related to the bombings. This marked the first time he was formally accused of terrorism in a U.S. court. Then came the day that changed the world forever, September 11, 2001. It was a clear Tuesday morning in the United States when 19 hijackers, members of the Islamist extremist network al-Qaeda, carried out a meticulously coordinated attack that would leave an indelible mark on history. At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City. The shockwave of disbelief was palpable. Initially, many believed it was a tragic accident. But just 17 minutes later, At 9:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 plowed into the South Tower, confirming that America was under attack. The Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, quickly took the unprecedented step of grounding all commercial flights across U.S. airspace, closing the skies to prevent further destruction. The terror didn't stop there. At 9:37 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77 slammed into the western facade of the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia, igniting a fireball that engulfed the building and killed 125 military and civilian personnel, in addition to the 64 passengers and crew on board. The Pentagon, a symbol of America's military strength, became another scar in this coordinated assault. Meanwhile, aboard United Airlines Flight 93, passengers were fighting for their lives. The plane had been hijacked and was headed toward a target in Washington, D.C., possibly the U.S. Capitol or the White House. But thanks to the courageous actions of the passengers, who stormed the cockpit after learning about the attacks via phone calls to loved ones, the hijackers were forced to crash the plane into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, at 10:03 a.m. Though all 44 people aboard perished, their bravery likely saved countless lives on the ground. In just under 2 hours, the unthinkable had unfolded. Both towers of the World Trade Center collapsed, first the South Tower at 9:59 a.m., followed by the North Tower at 10:28 a.m., reducing iconic skyscrapers to smoldering ruins and sending a plume of ash and debris over Manhattan. Over 2,977 innocent people were killed that day. Office workers, firefighters, police officers, and flight crew members. The victims represented over 90 countries, making it a global tragedy. As the dust settled, one name rose to prominence: Osama bin Laden. He quickly became a household name, the face of an unprecedented act of terror. Bin Laden, the founder and leader of Al-Qaeda, claimed responsibility for the attacks in a video released weeks later. The global response was swift and resolute. President George W. Bush addressed the nation that evening, declaring, "We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them." This marked the beginning of the U.S.-led war on terror, a conflict that would span decades and reshape global geopolitics. Within weeks, U.S. intelligence agencies identified Al-Qaeda and bin Laden as the perpetrators. Evidence, including intercepted communications, testimonies from detainees, and financial records, painted a clear picture of the planning and execution of the attacks. The Taliban government in Afghanistan, which had provided safe haven to bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, refused to hand him over. On October 7, 2001, the United States launched Operation Enduring Freedom, targeting Al-Qaeda training camps and Taliban strongholds in Afghanistan. Bin Laden himself became the target of a massive international manhunt. Dubbed Operation Neptune Spear, the hunt for bin Laden involved collaboration among the CIA, the Department of Defense, and allied intelligence agencies. It wasn't until May 2, 2011, that U.S. Navy SEALs found and killed him in a daring nighttime raid in Abbottabad, Pakistan. The events of September 11, 2001, changed the trajectory of modern history. Though Al-Qaeda has been weakened over the years, its ideology persists. Even in death, bin Laden's legacy continues to shape the world. Let us remember, learn, and strive for a future where such darkness is never allowed to thrive again.